Welcome back to Daf in Hand, Misdirected Zevachim Daf Zayin. May Hashem grant us to learn, study, and understand today's Daf. For comments or dedications, the contact address is dafinhand@gmail.com. So, we're continuing, we're deep in the woods of what's called misdirected intentions, thinking for this, Korban for this, and thinking it for something else. We had our Mishnah where we discussed chatas for an osham or oile, or one Korban meant for something else, and we discussed shini shem, shini bailim, whether it was the wrong designation of a Korban or the wrong designation of the person, for all four avoiders, for all four services such as shchita, Kabbalah accepting the blood, walking over the blood, and sprinkling on the mizbeach. We had various discussions. Today's topics are going to be about Todah, very similar Korban, which I'll explain in a moment. 7 teachings of Rava, and the Korban Pesach is more serious, similar to a chatas. The wrong intentions, not just is the Korban not good, but it is not just the Korban not credited, but it is totally rejected and expelled from the Beis Hamikdash. We had in our Mishnah that 2 kinds of no good. One is that, generally speaking, if I have the wrong intention for the wrong Korban, the owner doesn't get credit, he's disenfranchised, yet the Korban itself remains good and is processed. We also have a case such as in Chatos and Pesach, Korban Pesach, which is brought Erev Pesach. We learned that in those cases it is more serious, and the Korban that is brought with wrong intention is not just not credited, but totally no good, and it's expelled from the Beis Hamikdash. Let's come to Korban Todah. Korban Todah is what is Korban Todah? It's similar to Bentching HaGomel. Somebody benches HaGomel when we know he's either he traveled overseas, or he was in jail, or he was sick, or he's traveling in the desert. Interesting footnote that why is it that if somebody travels overseas, for example, from stateside to Israel, from New York to Israel, he would bench HaGomel, but yet if he flew from New York to Los Angeles, he would not. And if he drove from New York to Los Angeles, was statistically much more dangerous than flying from New York to Israel, it does not bench HaGomel. The answer is simply because when a person is driving, he's not in a place of danger. In most cases, even a fender bender, something goes wrong, you can always pull over. If you're in a plane, something goes wrong, you can't really pull over. And similar, if a person is in jail, especially in serious conditions, or somebody who's sick, the Shem has to go and pull him out from a place of danger. That's why when somebody's on top of the ocean, it's much more dangerous than over land. Okay, so now, since we have these 4 kinds of Todas, what happens? We know if somebody will bring his Todah for somebody else's Todah, it will be no good. What if he brings his Todah, for example, of getting out, Korban that he designated for getting out of jail, and in the end he thinks about getting out of the hospital? Would that be also what we call a fatal flaw in the Korban or not? And that's exactly what we're going to do, the first part of our mission. The first item on our agenda today. We're going to do 3 things. One is a Todah for very similar wrong intention. 7 teachings of Rava, and teaching us that Pesach is a more serious if it's done for the wrong designation. So we are holding Itmer about 9 lines from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines from the top by the 2 dots, and the Zayin with Aleph as follows. Itmer we learn. Todah sheshachtu l'shem Todah chavera. If I brought my Todah for my friend's Todah, meaning I had a case of coming out of jail, and my friend had a case of coming out of the hospital, so I brought my own Todah for my own misdirected cause, not for my friend, but for my own. I got out of jail, and I thought about getting out of the hospital. Rabbi says kasher, it's kosher, it's good enough. Rav Chizda Omer pasul. Rabbi Omer kasher, why? Because Todah shem Todah nishchad. At the end of the day, I had a Todah, I shechted for the Todah, and it's good. Something similar Somebody will bring a korban chatas. Now, chatas is for a very serious avera. So one of them is eating forbidden fats from an animal. One of them is eating the blood of an animal. So somebody who committed both sins and thought about, or just was supposed to bring chatas for eating chaylev, the fat, and he thought about bringing the chatas for the dam, for the blood, that would be good. So something similar over here and we had actually that before. We touched upon that topic. But right now, a todah of getting out of jail for a todah of the getting out of the hospital. So Rabbi says it's kosher. Chiz Amr Pasul. Right. Rabbi Amr Kasher todah shem todah nishchata. At the end of the day, it was shechted for it properly for the todah, so it's good. Chiz Amr Pasula the shem shlomim the shame. I'm changing the language as need be. The shame shlomim nishchata be'in. It has to be for his shlom didei nishchata be'in, and it was not done properly. Omer Rabba, how do I know that it is good? Tanya, it says it besar zevach toid shlomo. We had this earlier when we were learning about the shinui shame, the wrong kind of korban. But it says over here, Abu Chanan teaches us Mishim Rebbe Eliezer Bal Lilmod Toidish Shachta. It says over here Toidish Shlomo. Teach you Toidish Shachta Shem Shlomo. Toidish which is Shachta for Shlomo is Keshera. But Shlomo Shnish Shem Toidish is Pesulim. My Hefresh Ben Zel. What is the difference? And we had this before. Toidish Kriya Shlomim. Toidish is in the subset of Shlomim. Like a minor, like a two-circle minor Venn diagram. Toida is within the subset of Shlomim. But ain't Shlomim Korean Toida, but Shlomim is the general set and not within Toida. Therefore, Shlomim L'Shem Toida is Pesula. Shlomim meant for Toida apostle. Toida Shem Shlomim is Kesher. Now, my love, presumably, you want to tell me it's the Chavreg, that if I brought my Toida for my friend's Toida, Lloyd, that cannot be. Because my korban, my friend's korban, we know is no good. So it's the day. My own korban for one kind of toilet to another kind of toilet is good. So the Gemara says, okay, I hear your proof. However, according to what you're saying, it would seem to be I will what you want to tell me for my friend. It will be possible to add it to what we're doing now is based on your teaching of this Mishnah. We're going to ask you a question, and therefore I'm challenging your whole way of teaching this Mishnah. If this Bryce is telling me Shlomim for a Toida is Pesula, I have something better to teach. Listen to Toida L'Shem Toida, one Toida for my friend's Toida, the Kolshkin Shlomim, and for sure Shlomim L'Shem Toida. So why doesn't it teach us that? I challenge you your whole teaching of the Mishnah. No, there's not a problem. Shlomim L'Shem Toida Didei. I need my one shlomim for my own toida. Salkazayt which what we just learned. Me the toida kriya shlomim because toida is called a shlomim. Shlomim nama kriya toida. The shlomim is called a toida. V'chi shochet li l'shem toida. If I shech the shlomim for a toida, l'chshut should be kosher. Kamashmon, it's teaching you precisely that the greater set or the toida which is within the shlomim. If I made a toida for a shlomim, it would be okay. But if I made the shlomim for a toida, it would not be okay. And by the way, we learned how however, a shlomim for a toida would be no good, but a toida for a toida would be good. And we're not talking about my toida for my friend's toida. So therefore, my toida for my own toida, a toida of the korban toida, which is similar, as we said, to Bentching HaGomel, a korban toida of getting out of jail, or a korban toida of getting out of the hospital, according to Rabbi, that would be kosher. Okay, that's the end of the first part of today's daf. Teaching you that's a very, very similar difference of Shini Shem, that would be acceptable. We had earlier that it would be designated for a different kind of korban would be no good, but for its own kind of korban, Rabbi says, as we said, and using the word, Rabbi says, the exact wording, first he says that Rabbi says kosher, why? Toida l'shem toida nishchata, because at the end of the day, the toida was shechted for a toida, so therefore it's good. Great. Finish part 1. Now, let's do 7 teachings of Rav. Omer Rav, chatas sheshachtu l'shem chatas. If I shechted one chatas for a different kind of chatas, as we said, if I ate chalev and or dam, and I brought it from one of my own one of to another one of my own veras, kasher, that would be kosher. But l'shem oila, but if I shechted it for an oila, it would be pasula. My time of why? Because the shochet oisa lechatas, omrachmana, rechat l'shem chatas nishchuta. It says it has to be for chatas, and if I brought it from one for dam versus chalev, it's okay because at the end of the day it was for chatas. However, Shem Oila will be Pasula because it has to be Oisla Chatas and not for something else. That is teaching number one. Next, V'yomarov Chatas Shacht al Mishum Mechuyev Chatas Pasula. If I shecht one Chatas for somebody else who needs a Chatas, that would be possible. But al Mishum Mechuyev Oila, if I shecht my Chatas for somebody else who needs the Oila, that would be Kasher. Why? My time, the Chibra Olav V'loy Chaveroi, on him and not on his friend, meaning if my chatas for somebody else's chatas, that would be no good, but it has to be chaver jimi today. The mechuyev kapara kamoitze. It needs a similar kapara to myself, and if I have korban chata, in need of korban chata. My friend is in need of korban chata, and I'll take my chatas and shech for a friend. That would be no good. But if I send my chatas for my friend's oilet, as we said before, that is so out of the realm that it's so not connected, non sequitur. It's not no. This would be something similar. That it's not in the same. It's like if I was checking orange. It's not part of the same category. So my chat for somebody else's oil is just so out of it that it would. Granted, it won't give me I won't get credit for the chatas, but it won't destroy it and make it possible. Next, V'yomarova chatas sheshachta al mi she'ein mechuyev klum. If I shech the chatas for someone else who has no need for any kind of korbanos, it's pasula. And we're comparing this. Okay, we'll see in a moment. If my chatas somebody else's who doesn't need anything, it was possible. Even though you might say, well, that's completely not connected. Wait a moment. Why? There no person who doesn't have some kind of lack of fulfillment of a mitzvah. It's so easy to miss out on a mitzvah. You must be somebody needs a kapara for that, needs a forgiveness, some minor thing that he didn't do. And for Amarava, chatas mechaperes al chayva eser. Chatas will, in the end of the day, be mechaper, get forgiveness on somebody who transgressed and didn't fulfill a positive. Because what is that? Al chayva creases where somebody does an avera where the neshama gets cut off. Mechaperes gets a kapara. Al chayva eser lekoshkin. For sure he would. So therefore, if I want to bring a chatas for someone else who needs a kapara of an essay, it would work. So more want to understand this. Remember, you told me the bas minehi that is similar. I have a problem about telling me over here. First, you tell me that a chatas for an oil is fine because the oil is out of the realm. Then you tell me the chatas for something with somebody who needs an essay. That's a problem because the chatas could bring for an essay, and therefore it's no good. Well, which one is it? Is the oil okay, or is it chatas for an oil? Yes, okay. Which is the basic reason we're bringing in oil is because he didn't do an essay. So is a chatas good for an oil? And how can you tell me chatas good for an oil, but not good for an essay? Aren't they the same thing? I said no. I'll tell you the difference. Turn the page. Design base. Mikivel like mechapra from what is meant for it in the chatas for an oil which somebody did in a vera, and he said, okay, that I need to bring it. That is not mechapra, but mikufya mechapra. If as Rashi says, somebody who needs an oil and somebody who needs to bring an oil, and somebody who did an essay, he transgressed. Now you need to bring an oil, and if he needs to bring an oil, the chatas is not going to be connected to this man needing an oil, and therefore if my chatas somebody else's oil, it won't be a problem. But if somebody did not yet designate he's going to bring a oila, and he has a couple of essays on his heavenly account, and I'm going to bring my chatas, these heavenly, so to say, these heavenly transgressions which are floating around and were not yet connected to this man's oila, is going to get affected by my chatas, and therefore my chatas for something else will be a problem. So it's interesting. If this man already designated the oila, then my chatas doesn't touch his oila. But if he did not designate oila, he a couple of essays floating around, then my chatas could be a problem. It could connect to that, and chatas brought for something else does not work. Okay, so again, so therefore my chatas for somebody who didn't designate the oila is a problem. The chatas, somebody who designated the oila already, my chatas doesn't connect to that. Good. Next, V'yomarova, oila sheshachta shaloy l'shma, the oila which I brought for non-chatas, back to an oila now. I brought without for something else. Remember, we said spaced out is not an issue here. Spaced out is not a problem. It's better if a person will think what he's doing, but it's not a fatal flaw being spaced out. But if it's shechted for a different kind of animal, also there's a domer shloish where you can't continue. If you mother oil for a todah, something, then it's not kosher, but you still have to continue it properly. And how do you know that? Either same akro, either same svara, or we have a pasuk for this, or we have a logic for it. Either same akro pasuk, as we said, we did this a couple of times, that if a person brings a neder and he messes it up, it becomes at least a nedova. Same pasuk says, nedarto nedova. Well, which one is it? If we do it properly, it's a neder. If I misdirected it, it becomes a nedova, but still stands in its holiness, and I have to continue it properly, as we had on page on Gaf base. Even same as Swara, Mishum Deshana Bay, and if somebody, for example, has on Yom Kippur in the morning, and or unfortunately has a coffee, doesn't mean that he doesn't fast anymore. Same thing over here. If you didn't do the korban properly, doesn't mean that you discontinue its obligations. Kiddush Pirka, as we had in Kiddush Pirka, as we had at the beginning of our period, and therefore this is it's Rabbi teaching this, but the Gemara itself says, as we explained on that base. Next, somebody died, and his children are bringing an oil in his father's name. Shachta b'shini kodesh. If I shechted it to a wrong korban, for example, father left over an oil and he brought it for a shlomim, it will be possible. But b'shini bailim, if I brought it for somebody else, it's kasher. Why? It ain't bailim lachamisa. Because when the father died, this oila becomes effectively ownerless, and I can't change the owner. Therefore, that would not be a problem in this korban. Rav Pinchas Breder Rav Omer, who says yesh ba'im lachamisa, there is owner after dying. In other words, even though the korban, the owner died, but there is ownership to it. And Omer Vashler Pinchas Breder Rav Omer. Do we say that he owns it? And meaning that if the children, if they messed up, they have to actually bring another one. It's kind of like wishy-washy. There's no particular ownership, meaning that if the children had some averas, it would cover it, or the father had some outstanding averas would cover it. But if not, then okay, so we let it float away. I meant it dafka, and according to Rav Pinchas, if the children mess up the korban, they're obligated to supplement it and replace it, not supplement, to replace it with a korban of their own in the name of their father. Another one, Omerova, oile doirenhi, korban oile is considered to be like a present. How's that? Either like a tshuva, if the person bringing the korban didn't do tshuva, says Zevachim ta'eva. The person brings the korban without any intentions of tshuva, without any intentions of repentance, just comes, he brings the korban, and it's like it takes off as expense account and doesn't mean anything, then it's resented by Hashem. It's not, or it's a turnoff by Hashem. We did tshuva, and if we did tshuva already, Tanya, we learned how appropriate for now we're coming up with Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Overall mitzvahs say somebody who transgressed the mitzvahs say Vishav and he did tshuva, he gets immediate kapara, immediate forgiveness. Like Zaz Misham Achamoichem, he doesn't move until they actually give him a kapara on it. So how come? So why we're bringing the korban? We're not doing it's a gift. And Tanya Namacha, you skip the brackets. Those brackets are mnemonics for somebody who wants to memorize the entire blot, which really what we should be doing, but not for today. And to quote someone, that's not what we do here right now, but those are mnemonics for that. In any case, Tani Namahoche, Omrab Shimon, Chatas Lomri Bo, why does Chatas come? I say, what? Lama Bo, the Chaper, we know Chatas comes for forgiveness. Why do we bring a Chatas before an oiler? Situations such as the person has to bring two birds, one is a Chatas and one is an oiler. For example, if somebody says false testimony, or doesn't say testimony, he has to bring korban osham, and if he's poor, korban oil of a yored, he can bring two birds, one is chatas, one is oiler. Which one comes first? Always the chatas comes first, and then the oiler. It was similar to the similar the praklichinechnis. When a person has a court case, first the defending lawyer goes in. Ritza, Praklit, and the defending lawyer managed to appease the king, and the king is satisfied now, and he's allowed forgiveness. After that, Nechnes Doin Achor. Then we bring the gift in afterwards to the king, and a gift of peace offering to the king. After the king's already forgiven him, then you bring in the peace offerings. First the Chatos, and then the Oila. Okay, now point number 3. We're going to deal with Pesach, Korban Pesach. I'm going to, I'm going to remind you, because we're going to touch on this very, very strongly. There are 3 points what we're discussing. One is Shini Kodesh, that if I change from in one of my korbanos from designation of a chatas, for example, to an oila, or as we're going to be dealing today, I change the designation of a Pesach to a shlomim. That's called Shini Kodesh. I change the designation, the Kodesh, the holiness of it. Or Shini Bailim from Ruvain to Shimon, I had to bring it and the Kohen shechted in the name of somebody else. And the third one is La'akev. It's an interesting, kind of limud, kind of learning, in which Seder Kachim, the topic or the subject of Korbanos has something different than most other discussions. Korbanos, when we know there are many things which you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way, you have to do it properly. However, many times when something needs to be done, but if it's not done, it's not considered a fatal flaw. I present to you, for example, if I have an oil and I bring it for a shlomim, it's no good, but the korban still remains holy. Or other kinds of things where something that needed to be done. For example, I need to bring the parts of the animal, bring it up to the Mizbeach, or the Kahanim need to eat it. If it's not done, nevertheless, the owner still gets his kapara. How do we differentiate? When the Torah says something once, it means it's a recommended procedure. When the Torah repeats itself, then we learn that this is not just a recommended procedure, but what's called a fatal flaw. And if I didn't do it, it is rejected and it's no good. So that's called la'akev. That is actually no good either. So let's learn. Pesach minolon. Excuse me. Pesach. How do we know? The Mishnah said that shlomim, an oil for shlomim or such, that's fine. But a chatas or a pesach done for something else, not just the owner not get credit, but the entire animal is rejected and expelled. How do we know that? Because it says shomer is chodesh aviv, the sisa pesach. The first limit pasuk of vasisa pesach shekol siyas shem pesach. Everything should be for a pesach. Therefore, we learn there shouldn't be any if the shini. If it's a shini shame, a shini kodesh, then it's no good. By the way, I would point out to you, just as an aside, Pesach is only brought Erev Pesach in the afternoon. So after that, if a Pesach is left to lie around for some reason, that it was extra or lost, and then it was discovered Chalamoid Pesach, or afterwards, it could be brought into Shlomim. We're talking about a Pesach on the afternoon of Pesach. She called a Siyos L'Shem Pesach. Good. So now we've covered with this pasuk of Vasisa Pesach Shini Kodesh, Shini Bailam. And how do we know for the wrong owner it is also a problem? The pasuk says, "Amartim Zevach Pesach." The word Zevach Pesach, the Shadei Zevich L'Shem Pesach, has to be for Korban Pesach in the Shini Kodesh. Now this is teaching me Shini Kodesh, which we don't need because it's repetition, as we had before. And the Torah is too careful and precise, just throw around sentences for no reason. The Torah did take the trouble to teach it again. In the Shini Kodesh, if it's not for Shini Kodesh, no, in the Shini Bailam, and therefore we have Shini Bailam also, that the Pesach for another owner is rejected. Now, Ashkan the mitzvah, the Akamino, and how do we know not just is it needed to be careful, but if I did it, it's totally rejected. Amakrov is Zevachim Pesach L'Shem Lekech, a third pasuk. Teach you, this last pasuk teaches me La'akiv. Good? One pasuk is Shini Shem, Shini Kodesh, one pasuk is Shini Bailam, one pasuk is La'akiv, and we're happy now. Except, Maskvulor of Safra, this last pasuk of Vizavachim, which you're telling me, it's teaching me La'akiv. Hi, Vizavachim. L'hochida also, no, you using Vizavachim to teach me La'akiv. I'm sorry, but it's used for something else. And what is that? How do you know Moiser Pesach Korban Shlomim if I have a leftover Pesach, which is not brought on Pesach, and then Chalamoid. Notice if I had a designated Korban Pesach and it got lost, so I brought another one, and then at the end of the day I found it, came back home. Oh, I left it at home. Here's my Korban Pesach, but now it's already Chalamoid, or it's already after Pesach, and I come home. What do I do with this little lamb which was meant to be a Korban Pesach? Shekarav Shlomim, I bring it as Shlomim. How do I know that? Shenemar b'Zevach Pesach, and I point out this is the pasuk which we want to use for La'akiv, and now we use it for something else. B'Zevach Pesach, Shem Lekechot Tzoyne Boker, that's the pasuk. And how can you have Tzoyne Boker by Pesach? Pesach comes only from sheep and lamb, and we're putting in here cattle. How can you have Pesach from a cattle? We can the Moiser Pesach shaded Dover Bom and Tzaymin Aboker. Teach you leftover Pesach, which means a Chalamoid, or afterward can make into a cattle. What korban is cattle? Shlomim. So you see, the leftover Pesach can be a cattle. Now, not to confuse it, we still stand by what we said. The Pesach or something else is a problem, but after Pesach is no longer the time for Pesach. At that point, the sheep automatically converts into Shlomim. That's why we have this pasuk. But the bottom line is, we use this pasuk because you attempted to say La'akiv, and we use it for something else. So you no longer have this V'Zavach Pesach for La'akiv. So I put the question back to you, how do you know La'akiv? Rav Safra, you're right. V'Zavach Pesach, I'll agree with you, the Kid of Nachman. I have another pasuk. Shomer Chodesh Oviv, the mitzvah, B'Shini Kodesh. Right. V'amartim Zevach Pesach is the mitzvah, the Shini Kodesh. V'amartim Zevach Pesach is the Shini Bailam. The mitzvah is for mitzvah. He is La'akiv. The word he over there is La'akiv. Bein Hochav v'Hochav. So now, Ashkan Zevachim. So now we've learned that Zevachim is La'akiv. Shar Avodas Milon. How do we know that we've learned that Korban Pesach and Zevachim is a problem? How do we know other avodas also would be a problem if I did it improperly? Once I told you that Pesach is no good, the shechita by Pesach is no good, it includes everything else. Now, before you start pulling out your hair, because we had in the previous pages lines and lines and pages of how we need a pasuk for each single one. Here the more attempts to say that it's fine. No. We don't say that as the evidence we had before. So how do we know that not just is the shechita by Pesach required to be on target, but the other avodas also, and otherwise it's a fatal flaw? Because it says Zois Torah Zois Torah LaOila V'Lamincha and except L'Chat L'Shlom and various karbanos. Betanya, and it also says V'Yoim Tzavois Zois L'Bnei Yisrael L'Hakav's Korbanei means Zebachor U'Masr U'Pesach. Notice the word Pesach. Kisha Kasel the Shlomim, we compare Pesach to Shlomim. My Shlomim, just as by Shlomim we've learned Bentching Kodesh, Bentching Bailim, the Inil Mitzvah. I need it for the mitzvah of doing it properly. I've called Bentching Kodesh, Bentching Bailim, the mitzvah. It has to be also for mitzvah. So now, when I tell you that Pesach has to be proper, is for mitzvah. And now, by Shlomim, it stays the same. That is the mitzvah and not the akif. It's kind of like, it's a funny kind of a limud. Just as by other things, we say particularly it's the mitzvah and not the akif. A Pesach also is particularly the akif and not the mitzvah. Meaning, just as by Shlomim, we don't change the designation. So we compare Pesach to Shlomim. That not that Pesach is the same as Shlomim, but Pesach follows the same principle as Shlomim. Just as by Shlomim, we don't change the designation, and it's a ruling. So too by Pesach, where the shechita is la'akiv, that's a fatal flaw. So other avoidance, other avoidance, meaning like the things we need to do by Pesach, also does not change la'akiv. A Pesach lo yitach b'tzviach l'shar avoidance la'akiv. So now that we properly learned that, so the word he now is redundant, and we can't have that. The Torah was mindful, intentional. There's no redundant. Elohi lomali, Kedetanya for the following. Nemra b'Pesach he, b'shchita la'akev. Avol Osham loy nemra b'hi. By Pesach it's a shchita la'akev, but by Osham not el akev Torah zemorim. He asked Mishdektir more kosher to teach you that the Osham is if I did not bring if I didn't put the limbs on the mizbeach, it would be kosher. And also by extension, the Osham which was not brought for the proper intentions, it's not like a chatas, it's an asham, and it's similar to shlomim, and it would be kosher. So we properly learned how Pesach is similar to a chatas, and that it must be no shini kodesh is wrong, is bad for it. Shini bailim is bad for it, and not just is bad, but it's the opposite that it actually happened. It's considered to be like a fatal flaw, and it's not just not credited, but invalid. So we learned Pesach. What do we do today? We had a discussion of one Todah for another kind of Todah. We had the 7 rulings of Rava, and we followed up from our Mishnah. We know the Pesach is similar to Chatas. To have a mistake disqualifies and rejects the entire Korban. That's the end of Dav Zion. We're at the bottom. And I hope Shem grant us we should understand it. For any questions, comments, or designations, the contact number is dafinhand@gmail.com. Wishing you a good day. Thank you for listening.